this administration is not interested in Europe anymore. G.D. Vance was lecturing Europeans and saying that not Russia, neither China are a threat to Europe, but actually liberal democracy. And not to mention Ukraine. G.D. Vance said that he is not interested in Ukraine whatsoever. So that's why their priority has shifted. And then there is let's say, a simplistic worldview of Mr. Trump. He believes that his charisma is able to persuade Mr. Putin to give up on his geopolitical, let's say, desires to reestablish Russia as a sort of USSR 2.0.
It's been a night of relative calm in Kyiv after yesterday's wave of Russian airstrikes, which killed at least 23 people. The assaults were condemned by many European leaders, and also Keith Kellogg, Donald Trump's special envoy to Ukraine. He said these egregious attacks threaten the peace that Donald Trump is pursuing. Well, let's get a sense of the mood in the country with Alexander Khara, Executive Director of the Centre for Strategic Studies in Kyiv and a former advisor to Ukraine's Defence Ministry. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
One of the things we're reading about this morning is the idea of a potential buffer zone. It's being reported in the press here. A 40-kilometre wide buffer zone between the Russian and Ukrainian front lines as being part of some kind of ceasefire or peace deal. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, there is no peace deal in cards for the foreseeable future. Russia is not going to stop unless it is stopped. I am more positive about possible ceasefire, and particularly in the field of oil refineries and energy infrastructure, because recently Ukraine was able to take off up to 70% of Russian oil refinery capabilities. But I'm not sure about the readiness of Russia to have a comprehensive ceasefire, I mean, on the front line and the overall missile and drone attacks on the Ukrainian cities. So I believe it's just like wishful thinking of this 40 kilometers buffer zone, because the Russians are not ready to accept any kind of ceasefire. And it's much better to think about long-range jets for Ukraine, that Ukraine is able to destroy the Russian capabilities to target Ukrainian cities, rather than to plan something for unseeable future.
I guess the argument is that there have to be plans if and when a ceasefire or peace deal is made, as well as, of course, as you say, equipping Ukraine with what it needs. Do you feel that Ukraine is further from a peace deal than it has been in a long time, in light of those awful attacks on Kyiv the night before last?
Well, yes, Putin carries on his genocidal war because he feels impunity. And actually impunity was one of the reasons why the Russians attacked us in 2014 and then in 2022. So he's not going to stop. And actually, all this talk about peace talks is empty in its essence. The reason for that is Steve Witkoff, who is incapable of comprehending the complexity of this conflict, believed that Putin is ready to move his position and to have some concessions. And then we had this summit in Alaska that produced actually a U-turn from Mr. Trump, because before the meeting, he wanted to have a ceasefire, comprehensive and unconditional. Otherwise, he was ready to impose tariffs on Russia. And after the meeting, he said, no, I give up on this idea. I'll insist on the comprehensive peace. As I said, that Russia is not interested in that. In each and every conflict may be resolved in four ways. First, it's either of the side is defeated. Second, it's a European way. It's win-win. Both sides find a compromise. Third variant, when the one side is understand that carry out the war will not bring the desirable outcome, and that's better just to acknowledge the state of affairs on the ground. And finally, if one of the sides is not able to carry on the war, either because of economic troubles, political or social, so Russia believes that they have resources, they have will, and certainly they want to demolish Ukraine and move on to the West. That's why they are not interested in any peace, and that's why they are trying to inflict great damage on the Ukrainian civil population and destroy our industry, while they are coping with the Ukrainian defense forces at the east.
What do you think President Trump should be doing now, and why don't you think he's doing it?
It's obvious reason. For the United States, the key region is Indo-Pacific, and there is a campaign in his administration, particularly headed by Elbridge Colby, the Deputy Defense Secretary, and they believe that everything should be dedicated to deterring China there. And we've seen that this administration is not interested in Europe anymore. G.D. Vance was lecturing Europeans and saying that not Russia, neither China are a threat to Europe, but actually liberal democracy. And not to mention Ukraine. G.D. Vance said that he is not interested in Ukraine whatsoever. So that's why their priority has shifted. And then there is let's say, a simplistic worldview of Mr. Trump. He believes that his charisma is able to persuade Mr. Putin to give up on his geopolitical, let's say, desires to reestablish Russia as a sort of USSR 2.0. That's why there is no possibility of reaching any agreements if there is no change, profound change in thinking and then in action. And certainly Ukraine needs two things. First, more and more weapons, because the Russians are not going to stop. And second, more and more pressure. And now Russia is in a really, let's say, feeble position. Their economy in a fragile state, and they're suffering from sanctions and from, let's say, incompetence of some of the people from Putin's government. So instead of encouraging Putin and just giving him more resources, it's time to exert pressure, sanctions on Russia particularly, and the promised sanctions on China as well. Because the United States imposed tariffs on India, the second largest buyer of Russian oil, which is good and affected the situation in Russia. And with Ukrainian defense forces targeting Russian energy infrastructure, we see that Putin is facing pretty difficult dilemmas.
Alexander Khara, thank you for speaking to us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time. He is Executive Director of the Centre for Defence Strategies in Kyiv and a former advisor to Ukraine's Defence Ministry.
What he says there about pressure on Russia is something we'll consider later on with Grant Shapps, the former Defence Secretary, because while imports of goods from Russia in the first quarter of 2025 have dropped dramatically, so down to €8.74 billion from €30.58 billion 4 years ago, there are still imports of goods from Russia into the EU. There are purchases of oil, of nickel, of natural gas, of fertiliser, of iron, of steel. And so while there has been an impact, there is still billions of euros worth of trade going on, really.
And let's not forget Russian assets, which have been frozen. Much discussion, should the interest be used? Should the actual assets themselves be totally seized and used and spent on that war effort? And as we heard there from Alexander Khara, he just thinks that actually US focus is on China. It's not really that interested in Europe. So if that is the case, it's the European leaders that need to step up. And if they're still doing trade with Russia,
exactly.
What message, by calling the Russian ambassador to the Foreign Office to tell them off?
Yeah.
Does that cut it? Is that enough?
That diplomatic symbolism isn't really the pressure that I think Ukrainians are looking for.